What if, on an ordinary day while you were placing a simple order at Subway, you witnessed a scene of humiliation that no one dared to interrupt? Would you stay silent or take action? Now imagine that this humiliation happens to someone who just wants to work honestly, someone who left everything behind in search of a better life, but who, at that moment, was treated as if they were worthless. What if, in the midst of this revolting situation, one of basketball's biggest stars was there, watching everything? What if he decided to act in a way that would leave everyone speechless? Stephen Curry, one of the most iconic players in the NBA, three-time league champion and reference on and off the court, proved that his greatness lies not only in his talent for three-point shots, but also in the way he sees and values people. What he did that night went far beyond sports. It was a gesture that showed the true meaning of respect and empathy, something that many ignore, but that he made a point of making unforgettable. The scene took place in a busy subway. The smell of freshly baked bread mingled with the noise of machines and the murmur of conversations. Between orders being prepared and customers rushing by, a louder voice stood out. Two well-dressed men spoke in a mocking tone. Their laughter attracted attention, but not because of humor, but rather because of contempt. The target, the restaurant attendant, a young Mexican immigrant named Alejandro, had been working there for months to try to build a better future. Alejandro, with his impeccable uniform and polite posture, maintained his smile as he did every day, even when exhaustion took over. He had been through unpleasant situations before, but never anything like this. Customers laughed, made fun of his accent, made jokes about his work, and little by little, an awkward silence took over the environment. People looked, some looked away, but no one intervened. It was then that a firm voice echoed through the restaurant. "And you think this is funny?" The laughter stopped instantly. Everyone turned their heads to see who had spoken, and there, standing, watching everything with a serious and determined look, was Stephen Curry. The customers, who until then had enjoyed mocking the attendant, looked back, confused, without immediately understanding who was there. Alejandro, who until that moment had been trying to swallow the humiliation without reacting, slowly looked up and felt his heart speed up when he realized who had spoken. Stephen Curry, one of the greatest players in NBA history, was standing there looking directly at the two men, his serious countenance and imposing posture making the air in Subway thick. Nobody expected this. Nobody imagined that that basketball star, one of the most respected athletes in the world, would be there, observing everything. The arrogant customers exchanged quick glances, trying to hide their discomfort. One of them forced a nervous laugh, as if trying to minimize the situation. "Hey man, it was just a joke, no stress, okay?" But Curry didn't take his eyes off them. His face didn't show the slightest amusement. He took a step forward, crossed his arms, and without needing to raise his voice, said something that made everyone around hold their breath. "Funny? You know what I find funny? You think you can treat people like this and get away with it." Alejandro felt a lump in his throat. No one had ever done this for him before. Whenever he was disrespected, the people around him just watched. Some might get upset, but no one took sides. But here was Stephen Curry, a global icon, willing to put those men in their place. The silence in the restaurant was absolute. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. One of the customers snorted, still trying to maintain an air of superiority. "Dude, relax, we're just kidding. Besides, he works here, it's part of his job to serve us." Curry smiled wryly, but his eyes showed no patience. "It's part of his job to serve, not to be disrespected. What you did is not a joke, it has another name, cowardice." Customers no longer knew where to look. The people at Subway were now completely alert. Some even took out their cell phones to record, feeling that the moment would become memorable. Alejandro still didn't know how to react. He felt a mixture of shame, gratitude, and surprise. He never thought someone like Stephen Curry would look at him and defend him like that. Alejandro never imagined that a normal day at work would turn into a moment that would be remembered forever. At 23, he had left his hometown in Mexico with a single goal: to build a better future for himself and his family. Son of a struggling single mother, he grew up seeing the daily struggle to put food on the table and understood early on that if he wanted something in life, he would need to work hard. That's why, when he had the opportunity to move to the United States, he didn't think twice. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to face any difficulty to give a dignified life to his mother and brothers who were left behind. At Subway, where he worked for just over a year, Alejandro was always known for his dedication. His colleagues said he was one of the hardest workers, someone who never complained, no matter the situation. His uniform was always impeccable, his hair short and well-combed, his smile discreet but always present. He treated every customer with respect, even when some didn't give him the same in return. He believed that honest work was dignified, that each sandwich he made was another step towards his dream. The dream of one day being able to bring his mother close to him so that she no longer had to worry about money. But not everyone saw his effort. Some saw just an attendant, an immigrant serving behind the counter, someone who could be belittled without consequences. Alejandro had been through difficult times before, but that night was different. The humiliation was open, and in front of so many people. 2 clients, clearly successful, laughing at your expense, mocking your work, your accent, your profession. He tried to ignore it, as he did every other time, but this time, it was impossible not to feel the lump in his throat, the weight of being treated as if he were invisible. When one of the customers dropped the napkins on purpose and told him to pick them up, Alejandro felt his breath hitch. He looked around and saw that no one was saying anything. Some people lowered their heads, others looked uncomfortable, but no one took action. He knew that if he took those napkins, he would be accepting this humiliation, but if it didn't stick, it could be seen as disrespectful. He didn't know what to do. It was at that moment that that firm and unmistakable voice echoed throughout the restaurant. "And you think this is funny?" Alejandro felt a shiver run through his body as he recognized who had spoken. He looked up, and there, standing in front of him, was Stephen Curry, looking directly at the customers who had just humiliated him. "Now, tell me, have you ever seen something like this? Comment dignity if you believe that every worker deserves respect." Alejandro had served hundreds of customers during his time at Subway, some hurried, others polite, and some who simply ignored his existence, treating him just as part of the scenery. But that night, he felt from the first moment that those 2 men would be different. They entered the store in a loud manner, laughing loudly as if they wanted to attract attention. They wore designer clothes, shiny watches that glittered in the light of the restaurant, and they had that look of superiority on their faces, the kind of look that says without needing words that they felt better than everyone around them. Even noticing the tone of arrogance, Alejandro did what he always did. He took a deep breath, maintained his professional posture, and in his calm voice asked, "Good evening, gentlemen, what would you like today?" He already expected that maybe they would be difficult, but he wasn't prepared for what came next. The first man, tall and with a mocking smile, looked at his friend and laughed before responding. "Wow, does this guy really know how to speak English?" The second laughed, crossing his arms, as if waiting for Alejandro to react. But he didn't react. He just swallowed and kept his expression neutral. "I hope he doesn't ruin my order. These guys only know how to work in fast food anyway." The words hit hard, as if each one was a small stab to his dignity. Alejandro had heard bad comments before, but the way those men mocked him without fear, without shame, as if he were invisible, made something inside him twist. He took a deep breath. His job always required patience, but tonight he was being tested in ways he hadn't imagined. He maintained his posture, continued assembling the order, but was unable to completely hide his discomfort. His hands shook slightly as he picked up the ingredients. He didn't want to look directly at those customers, but he could feel their gaze on him. They were having fun, laughing among themselves, exchanging venomous comments as he tried to ignore everything and focus on work. The first man knocked lightly on the counter, as if wanting to attract attention. "So, man, do we have to wait a long time? Or are you translating our order in your head?" The friend laughed again while some people in line looked uncomfortable, but as always, no one said anything. Alejandro was used to holding back his words, swallowing any desire to react. But this time, the humiliation was beyond what he could bear. His face felt hot, not from anger but from shame. He just wanted to get it over with, deliver the order and get rid of those people. But before he could do so, one of the customers grabbed a handful of napkins and purposely threw them on the counter, smirking. "Since you're here to serve, do something useful and get this for me." The silence in the restaurant became heavy. Alejandro looked at the napkins on the counter and then at the customers, not knowing how to react. If he caught it, he would be accepting the humiliation. If he refused, he could lose his job. Neither option seemed good, but before he could do anything, a firm and imposing voice echoed through the room, cutting through the air like a blade. "Do you think this is funny?" The 2 men's laughter disappeared instantly. Everyone in the restaurant turned to see where that voice was coming from. Alejandro also looked up, and at that moment, he felt a shiver run through his body when he realized who was there. Stephen Curry, the NBA's greatest three-point shot specialist, one of the biggest stars in world basketball. And now at that subway, he was staring at the arrogant customers as if he was about to teach them a real lesson. Alejandro felt the weight of humiliation with every second that passed. His face burned, not just from embarrassment but from helplessness. He just wanted to do his job, finish that order and move on, but the customers wouldn't let up. The mockery continued, and each new sentence was filled with contempt. "Do you always take this long, or are you trying to understand the request?" said one of them, crossing his arms and looking at his friend, expecting more laughter. The other, with a sarcastic smile on his face, pretended to hit his forehead as if he had had a great idea. "Ah, I know, he must be translating in his head before answering." Their laughter echoed throughout the restaurant. Alejandro swallowed hard. He had been in uncomfortable situations before, but this was different. He was not an impatient customer, nor was he simply rude. Those men were directly attacking who he was, his origins, his accent, his daily struggle to try for a better life. And the worst? Nobody did anything. Some people looked away, as if ignoring it was the best option. Others simply pretended not to hear. The restaurant was full, but Alejandro had never felt so alone. He took a deep breath, picked up the ingredients with shaking hands, and tried to continue. But for those men, humiliating was not enough. They wanted to demote him completely. The man with the expensive watch grabbed a handful of napkins and, with an exaggerated gesture, dropped them all on the counter. "Since it's here, at least it can clean it up." This time the laughter stopped. The entire restaurant was silent. Alejandro stood still for a moment, looking at the napkins spread out on the counter. His mind worked fast, but his body didn't react. Should he put his head down and take it, or just ignore it? But ignoring would mean disrespecting a client, and he needed that job. Every dollar he earned was essential to his family. His chest rose and fell with heavy breathing, trying to contain the wave of humiliation that hit him like a punch. The silence continued. Some people in the restaurant looked on with uncomfortable expressions, but no one spoke, until a firm and authoritative voice cut the air, making it clear that that moment would not end as the customers expected. "Do you think this is funny?" The tone of the voice was calm, but it carried an unquestionable weight. The two men froze, their smiles instantly gone. Alejandro blinked a few times, trying to process what was happening. He looked up slowly, and it was then that he saw it. Standing a few steps ahead, facing the customers without looking away, was none other than Stephen Curry. The entire restaurant seemed to have frozen the instant that voice echoed. It was a calm tone, but loaded with authority, and whoever was about to continue with the provocations simply froze. The arrogant customers' laughter died in midair, and the mocking look they had been carrying until that moment was replaced by confusion. They looked at each other, not immediately understanding what was happening, until their eyes finally met the imposing figure that was slowly walking towards the counter. Stephen Curry, one of the greatest basketball players in the world, was there. Not as an NBA star surrounded by cameras and fans, but as a man who simply couldn't ignore the injustice happening before his eyes. He had observed everything from the beginning, sitting at the back of the restaurant, analyzing every detail of that revolting scene. He saw the way Alejandro tried, unsuccessfully, to maintain his dignity. He saw the humiliation disguised as a joke, the way these men thought they were superior simply because they had money in their pockets. And now, he was no longer just watching. Curry's every step toward the counter seemed to make the mood heavier. The air carried a tension that no one dared break. The customers who had previously been busy humiliating Alejandro now seemed uncertain, uncomfortable. One of them tried to smile, as if he still had some control over the situation. "So man, do you want an autograph or something?" But Curry didn't smile. His gaze went straight between the two men and found Alejandro, who was still looking at the napkins spread out on the counter, as if he was caught between acting or simply remaining still, hoping that this moment would pass quickly. But at that moment, Stephen Curry wasn't going to let it end like that. He approached, tilted his head a little, and asked without looking away, "Are you okay?" Alejandro blinked a few times, seeming to come out of a trance. I didn't quite know how to respond. I was still processing what was happening. I still felt the weight of humiliation burning inside me, but at the same time, I now felt something new, a strange sense of relief. As if, for the first time, someone was there to defend her dignity. He took a deep breath and tried to hide it, trying to look professional, trying not to show the pain he felt. "Yes, sir, everything is fine." But his voice broke at the end of the sentence. It wasn't true, everything wasn't right. He wanted to believe so, but he couldn't, and Curry realized that. It was then that the player turned his attention to customers. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to get excited. He just stared at them with that firm posture, that look that conveyed much more than any scream could. And then he said the sentence that changed everything. "The problem here is not the service. The problem is you." The silence that already dominated the restaurant became even denser. This sentence was like an invisible punch, and customers felt the impact immediately. Everyone at Subway was about to witness an unforgettable moment. Now I want to hear from you. If you were in Alejandro's shoes, what would you do? Comment, always respect. If you believe that no one deserves to be treated this way. The impact of Stephen Curry's words was immediate. The air in the restaurant became thick, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The two arrogant customers, who minutes before were laughing loudly and mocking Alejandro without the slightest remorse, now tried to hide their discomfort. One of them let out a forced laugh, crossing his arms in a pathetic attempt to regain control of the situation. "Wow, now we have a defender of the weak and oppressed," he said, trying to sound sarcastic, but his voice no longer carried the same confidence. Curry didn't even blink. He wasn't there to argue, nor to get excited. His gaze remained fixed on the men in front of him, his posture relaxed but undeniably firm. His presence alone was intimidating, but what really made Subway's mood change completely was the short, cold response that came shortly after. "Do you know the difference between you and him? He's working, and you're just wasting oxygen." It was like a blow that no one expected. The silence that took over the restaurant was deafening. Customers, who until then seemed to be in control of the situation, were left without reaction. Their faces became rigid, as if they were trying to come up with a quick answer, but nothing was coming. They knew that anything they said now would only make them more ridiculous. Alejandro, who still felt heavy breathing from everything he had just been through, looked at Curry in disbelief at what was happening. No one had ever stood up like that for him. Throughout his life, he always heard that he needed to be strong, that he needed to swallow insults, that he needed to accept that some people would treat him in an inferior way just because he was an immigrant. But now, before their eyes, one of the greatest basketball idols in the world was putting those men in their place. The entire restaurant watched in silence. Some people were holding their cell phones, recording the scene. Others just watched, shocked by the unexpected turn of events. Alejandro felt his heart beating faster. He had never felt so proud of his work as he did at that moment. For a moment he realized that he didn't need to lower his head, that he should never be ashamed of who he was or what he did. The arrogant customers seemed hopeless. One of them looked around, realizing that they were now the center of attention, but not in the way they would have liked. The situation had completely changed. What was once a show of humiliation against Alejandro had now become a public lesson in respect. The silence that dominated the restaurant was broken by the sound of Stephen Curry's wallet opening. All eyes turned to his hands, curious to know what he would do next. In a calm but meaningful movement, Curry pulled out a wad of bills and placed $500 on the counter, right in front of Alejandro. The attendant remained completely still without really understanding what was happening. "This is for your great work. Don't let anyone put you down." Curry's voice sounded firm, but at the same time gentle. Alejandro blinked a few times as if he needed a moment to process it. His chest rose and fell rapidly, and his eyes began to water. He wasn't crying just for the money, but for the gesture. For the first time in a long time, he felt that someone really saw his effort, that someone appreciated the hard work he did every day. The arrogant customers were completely unresponsive. The man who minutes before was making fun of Alejandro, the same one who threw the napkins on the counter as if he were a nobody, now looked at Curry without knowing where to put his face. The other pulled his friend by the arm, trying to discreetly leave the restaurant, as if running away could erase everything that had just happened. But Curry wasn't going to let them just disappear like nothing happened. Before they set foot outside, he said loudly and clearly, "Maybe now you'll learn that respect is worth more than money." The sentence cut the air like a blade. It was the final blow. The customers didn't even try to respond. They just lowered their heads and quickly left, visibly embarrassed. Just as the subway door closed behind them, An unexpected sound echoed through the restaurant, first shy, then stronger. Applause. Customers who had previously watched in silence now clapped. Some smiled, others looked at Alejandro with admiration. The attendant, still holding back tears, felt his heart racing. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to thank him, but he knew he would never forget that moment. Stephen Curry not only taught those men a lesson, he showed the world that greatness is not in money, but in how we treat others. Alejandro felt his heart racing. His hands were still shaking slightly as his eyes were fixed on the bills on the counter. He tried to speak, but his voice just wouldn't come out. The lump in his throat grew with every second, and the weight of everything that had happened seemed to finally come crashing down on him. All his life he was taught to be strong, not to show weakness, to swallow words he wanted to say to avoid problems. But at that moment, faced with Stephen Curry's unbelievable gesture, he couldn't contain his emotion. He looked up, still holding back tears, and finally managed to whisper something barely audible. "Thank you." But it wasn't a simple thank you. It was a gratitude that carried years of effort, of struggle, of moments when he felt invisible, of humiliations that he suffered in silence. It was the kind of gratitude that came from the depths of his soul, because for the first time he felt like someone truly saw his worth. The restaurant, which minutes before seemed like a cold and indifferent place, was now completely transformed. The applause, which began timidly, grew louder, and some people began to approach the balcony. "You do an amazing job, man. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise," said a man in a suit, who until then had just watched the scene. A woman waiting in line made a point of saying, "We can see when a person has character, and you showed that today." Alejandro blinked a few times, still surprised. He never imagined that so many people would notice his struggle, that so many people would care. It was then that someone took out their cell phone and started recording. "This needs to be shared," said a young man who was sitting near the door. He opened a video app, and within seconds, Alejandro's story was being published online. Other customers followed suit, and before Alejandro could even understand what was happening, his story was about to go viral. Now tell me, what would you have done in Alejandro's place? Comment, "All work deserves respect." One believes that no one should be humiliated for trying to earn an honest living. The impact of the moment went far beyond the walls of that subway. The video recorded by one of the customers quickly spread across the internet, and within minutes, it began to gain traction on social media. At first, there were just a few shares and comments from people outraged by the humiliation that Alejandro suffered and admired by Stephen Curry's attitude. But as views increased, the case began to gain unimaginable proportions. Large profiles began to repost the video, influencers commented on what happened, and the hashtag "Find Respect Above Everything" started to become a trend. The images were strong. On one side, Alejandro, an honest worker who just wanted to do his job with dignity. On the other, the arrogant customers who had tried to humiliate him, but ended up becoming the real shamers. And in the middle of this story, Stephen Curry, one of the NBA's biggest stars, showing that being an idol goes far beyond what you do on the court. His gesture made thousands of people reflect on how we treat those who serve us daily, whether in a restaurant, a supermarket, or anywhere else. Within hours, major news portals began to report on the event. Headlines like "Stephen Curry teaches a lesson in humility at a restaurant in the USA" and "NBA star defends humiliated employee and moves the internet" appeared on sports, entertainment, and behavior websites. Comments from people around the world began to emerge. Alejandro, who until that moment had no idea of the repercussions of the case, only realized the size of the impact when his cell phone started receiving messages from strangers from around the world. People thanking him for his strength, saying that they have already been through something similar and that they felt represented by him. But the most exciting moment was yet to come. Amid all the chaos on the internet, one tweet caught attention. It was from Stephen Curry, who wrote few words, but which carried enormous weight. "All work is worthy. Respect can't be bought. It's built." This simple phrase made engagement explode even more. Basketball players, celebrities, ordinary people, everyone commented, praised, and sympathized with Alejandro. And at that moment, he realized that without meaning to, he had become a symbol of something much bigger than he imagined. What happened to Alejandro is not an isolated case. He represents millions of immigrants and workers around the world who wake up early every day, face challenges, deal with prejudice, and fight to build a better future. He could be any of us. Anyone who has ever been ignored, devalued, or treated with contempt just for being in a position of service. But the truth is that no honest work deserves disrespect. And if Stephen Curry, one of the greatest players in the NBA, had the courage to stand up and defend Alejandro, why do so many people prefer to remain silent in situations like this? Now, I ask you, if you were there, what would you do? Would you have remained silent like most, or would you have taken action? I really want to know your opinion. Comment below, and if you believe that every worker deserves respect and dignity, write respect in the comments. And look, if you like this type of story, if you want to see more unforgettable moments from great basketball stars on and off the court, then don't leave without subscribing to the channel. Here you will find the most exciting, impactful, and inspiring stories from the biggest names in world basketball. Activate the bell so you don't miss anything, because every week we bring you new stories that will surprise you. If this story moved you, wait until you see what Michael Jordan did for his personal driver's son, a gesture of pure grandeur that proves that true giants are not only measured by the titles they win, but by the impact they leave on people's lives. And the best part? This video is already appearing on your end screen now. Click and watch, because this story will move you.